Listening Library presents The Lone Ranger by Disney Press and adapted by Elizabeth Rudnick. Read for you by Bradford Hastings.
Prologue. San Francisco, July 1933. In the bustling city by the bay, it was hard to tell that the rest of the country was in the midst of one of the worst years of its young history. Instead of dust bowls and depression, San Francisco was booming. Steamships dotted the harbor, while up on the hill, cranes lifted beams high into the skyline. Amid all of it, a fairground had been set up, its bright lights warm and welcoming against the dimming sky. Families wandered the fair, children in tow, while young men attempted to impress their girlfriends with cotton candy and big stuffed animals. Amid it all, a carousel circled slowly, giving its passengers time to take in the San Francisco skyline and the tiny people below. A young boy with a toy six-shooter strapped to his hip strode through the fair, a bemused look on his face. His name was Will, and he had seen it all before. The games, the shows, the silly carousel that was far too slow for the likes of him. There was only one thing that interested him about the fairground: the Wild West show. It was supposed to be the greatest show on earth, but Will wanted to see for himself. Reaching up, he adjusted the mask he wore over his eyes and ducked inside the tent. As his eyes adjusted to the gloom, Will made out several dioramas depicting scenes from the Wild West. There was a stuffed bison next to a big stuffed bear, both of their coats missing fur and spots. Nearby, a covered wagon was frozen in motion, its white canopy aged and yellowed. Walking along, Will sighed. Everything looked old and fake. He wanted to see something exciting, something real. He came to a stop in front of one of the dioramas. The sign above read, "The Noble Savage in His Natural Habitat." Inside sat a lifeless Comanche Indian, his ancient face covered in white and black paint. On his head perched a stuffed crow with faded black feathers. As the rest of the crowd moved along to the next diorama, Will stayed back, absently eating from his bag of peanuts. He had never seen a real Comanche Indian. Even though he knew it was just a statue, he couldn't help leaning in closer. Suddenly, the Comanche Indian's eyes flickered. With a gasp, Will dropped his bag of peanuts and took a step back. Reaching down, he pulled out his toy gun and fired. The harmless cap sounded loud, but the sound of Will's pounding heart was even louder. "Kimosabe?" the old Comanche Indian said, his voice scratchy. He leaned forward, narrowing his ancient, watery eyes. "You bring horses?" "I think you made a mistake, mister," Will said hesitantly. A sadness seemed to settle over the old man as he looked down at Will. The intense gaze made Will nervous, and he took a step back, stepping on a peanut shell. The crack startled him anew, and his heart began to race again. Looking at the bag of peanuts that had fallen to the floor, the Comanche raised an eyebrow. "Make trade?" he asked. Will glanced down at the peanuts and then back at the Comanche. With a shrug, he retrieved the snack and tentatively handed it over. The elderly man took the bag from Will's palm, replacing it with the corpse of a mummified mouse. Will recoiled in disgust. Then, gulping, he nodded his thanks. As the Comanche munched on a peanut, Will lowered his mask to try to get a closer look. He knew that he wasn't imagining it. The Comanche Indian was most definitely alive, but how? And why had he chosen to speak to him of all people? "Never take off the mask," the man said, breaking into Will's thoughts. "Why not?" Will asked. The old Comanche closed his eyes as a long-forgotten memory surfaced. He began to speak, so softly, Will had to strain to hear his story. On a hilltop, hidden among the trees, the Comanche Indian, now clearly much younger, sat astride his horse, gazing into the horizon. The same stuffed crow perched on his head. Next to him, on a horse of his own, sat a man who wore a white hat and a black mask. As they sat there, the man adjusted his mask, clearly uncomfortable. "You sure about this?" he asked. The Comanche looked at him, then returned his gaze to the horizon before speaking. "Dead men strike fear into the heart of his enemies," he said cryptically. "All right," the man replied with a sigh. "Let's do this." Kicking their horses' sides, the two men burst out of their cover and thundered down the hill. Within moments, they had reached a small town nestled into the hillside. Wooden buildings lined the one main street, and as they raced through, people scattered out of the way. The masked man and the Comanche Indian reined their horses to a stop in front of one of the larger buildings, the Colby Municipal Bank. Jumping off their horses, the men burst through the doors. "Ladies and gentlemen," the masked man announced, "my colleague and I will be making a withdrawal." For a moment, nobody said a thing. Then a man wearing a stovepipe hat took a step forward. "What are you two supposed to be?" he asked, sounding more confused than scared. The masked man exchanged glances with his compatriot. "I told you," he said under his breath, "I feel ridiculous. Maybe if we go out and come in again—" Before he could finish his thought, the Comanche Indian whipped out his tomahawk and threw it across the room. It sliced the man's hat in two before thudding into the clock on the wall behind him. Taking the cue, the masked man pulled out his gun and fired into the air. A huge chandelier crashed to the ground, shattering and causing the customers to scream. "Guess I didn't make myself clear," the masked man said. "This is a bank robbery." Together, he and the Comanche Indian leaped over the counter and made their way toward the safe. Will had been listening, wide-eyed, to the old man's story, but now he stopped him. "Wait a minute," he said, realization dawning. He knew who the Comanche was, and the masked man. He had read all about them in his adventure stories. "You're saying you're Tonto. The Tonto." "There is another?" the old man asked. "But the Lone Ranger and Tonto were good guys," Will protested. "I mean, they didn't rob banks, did they?" For a moment, Tonto was silent. Then he spoke, his voice stronger and full of the wisdom of many years. "There comes a time," he said, "when a good man must wear a mask." Chapter 1. Colby, Texas, 1869. The air was dusty and full of the sounds of men hard at work. Hammers clanged against steel as men of every race and creed laid down 100-pound railroad ties. Dirt billowed into the already thick air as other men hacked away, creating trenches out of the hard desert floor. Parked nearby, waiting to move forward, was the great and mighty Constitution, one of the biggest and fastest locomotives ever built. In the midst of all the work, a man stood before a small crowd. Unlike the workers behind him, Latham Cole was impeccably dressed. He carried himself like the war hero and railroad man he was, his shoulders high and his chin higher still. Next to him, Sheriff Garrick P. Donovan stood, scanning the crowd to ensure no one caused any trouble. Cole had been clear. This was a very important day. Clearing his throat, Cole stepped forward. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "I have asked you here today to see firsthand what I believe to be the single greatest enterprise under God." He paused and gestured to the tracks being laid behind him. "To unite this great country by iron rail." The crowd let out a round of applause, and Cole soaked it in, loving the attention that his tracks and he were getting. His eyes drifted to one audience member in particular. Standing toward the back, her hands still, was Rebecca Reed. Even in her worn work clothes and dust-stained boots, she was beautiful, and Cole found himself losing focus. Shaking his head, he continued, "Our crews are laying track at an unprecedented rate of 10 miles a day, and, God willing, we will reach Promontory Summit by summer's end." Once again, the crowd erupted in applause. Cole turned his attention toward a group of Comanche Indians standing together at the edge of the crowd. One of the men, Red Knee, returned Cole's stare with his one eye, the other lost in battle years before. "To the Comanche," Cole went on, "I say you have nothing to fear. I fought 4 years with the army of Ulysses S. Grant.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?